Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Sarah and I am your host for this podcast, and we have yet another author interview this week. The second one again this week, which I'm having so much fun with. I have been interviewing authors on the weekend and then editing the interviews and getting them up during the week and having so much fun meeting new people and learning about their books and their writing processes and all of those things. It's been great. So here we are, the first week of December 7th, which means that the first week is past. We are almost at the end of this year, which is crazy. I hope that you are having a lovely December and that whatever your December plans involve, you're also finding time to, de-stress a little bit. I know that December can be a little crazy and a little stressful depending on what types of holidays and how you celebrate and how you might celebrate them. So I would say, find a good book and just take at least 15 minutes every day to sit down and read and decompress and not run around being crazy during December. That's my little spiel at the beginning of this podcast. So today I am speaking with author Tess Gerritsen. Tess is the author of numerous standalone novels, but she is also the author of 12 novels in the Rizzoli and Isles series. So many of you have probably already read her. If you haven't, you should definitely check her out. I hadn't actually read any of the novels in the Rizzoli and Isles series before this interview, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, I read the 12th in the series and didn't have any trouble getting into it and picking up the characters. I will go back and read the first 11 just to kind of catch up on some of that backstory of the main characters. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's one of those kind of, detective mystery novels trying to figure out who did it, murder mystery kind of things, and it's very well done, very interesting. This one has some really interesting aspects to it. I don't want to give too much away. Tess will talk a little bit more about it in our interview. And some of you probably, of course, also know that Rizzoli and Isles is a TV show. It's a series on TNT. And again, I haven't read the books and I haven't seen the series. I'd heard of both of them, and the books have been on my to be read list for quite some time. But if you are a fan of the series but haven't read the books, then the TV series but haven't read the books, then you definitely should. Even if you aren't a fan of the series but you like this type of book with a good mystery and suspense and a whodunit kind of thing, then you should definitely check out this book. The 12th, I haven't mentioned the title, I just realized. The 12th book in the series is called I Know a Secret. And I'll give you the blurb from the book jacket. 2 separate homicides at different locations with unrelated victims have more in common than just being investigated by Boston PD Detective Jane Rizzoli and medical examiner Maura Isles. In both cases, the bodies bear startling wounds, yet the actual cause of death is unknown. It's a doubly challenging case for the cop and the coroner to be taking on at a fraught time for both of them. As Jane struggles to save her mother from the crumbling marriage that threatens to bury her, Maura grapples with the imminent death of her own mother, infamous serial killer Amalthea Lank. While Jane tends to her mother, there's nothing Maura can do for Amalthea except endure one final battle of wills with the woman whose shadow has haunted her all her life. Though succumbing to cancer, Amalthea hasn't lost her taste for manipulating her estranged daughter, this time by dangling a cryptic clue about the 2 bizarre murders Maura and Jane are desperately trying to solve. But whatever the dying convict knows is only a piece of the puzzle. Soon the investigation leads to a secretive young woman who survived a shocking abuse scandal, an independent horror film that may be rooted in reality, and a slew of martyred saints who died cruel and unusual deaths. And just when Rizzoli and Isles think they've cornered a devilish predator, the long-buried past rears its head and threatens to engulf more innocent lives, including their own. That is a great description. I mean, you've got family dynamics, you've got crazy, estranged mothers who are manipulating you even as they're dying. You've got martyrs and horror movie makers and just all kinds of things, right? There's all these different elements that have to come together and try to be figured out as Maura and Jane sift through the pieces and try to figure it out. So it's really well done, and I enjoyed it a lot. Definitely go pick it up if you haven't read this. This is the 12th one. You can start at the beginning if you want, or you can find whatever you can at your library, however you do that. It's definitely a series I recommend checking out. So that is definitely, again, with the word definitely, enough out of me. And let's turn now to my interview with Tess Gerritsen, author of I Know a Secret. Hi, Tess. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
I would love for my listeners to get to know you just a little bit. So if you could tell us something about yourself, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Well, I'm a writer. I was a doctor, practiced medicine for a while, and have been at this business for 30 years as a writer. And I'm still learning stuff and still trying to write the best book ever.
Wonderful. So we're here to talk about the newest book in the Rizzoli and Isles series. So for people who maybe haven't read the series, can you give us a brief overview?
Yes, Rizzoli and Isles is now a 12-book series, and it features two heroines. One is homicide detective Jane Rizzoli, and the other is medical examiner Maura Isles. And they work together as colleagues, and over the course of these 12 books, they've also become friends. So together, they trust each other, they trust the other woman's judgment. They have their ups and downs as friends, but in the end, they always try to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us about the inspiration for this series? What gave you the idea?
Well, it started off with a book called The Surgeon, which I had intended to be a standalone novel. And Jane Rizzoli wasn't even the main character in that story. She was sort of a secondary character. And as I was writing the book, I had one intention for Jane. My intent for Jane was that she would die.
Oh.
She was the sidekick to the hero. And I thought I was going to kill her by the end of The Surgeon. But then I got to the end and I realized I had learned to like her quite a bit. She started off kind of, bitchy, not very likable, a kind of a woman who's sort of a fish out of water. She's the only woman in her homicide unit, and she's always struggling for respect. By the end of the story, she was the one who actually cracked the case, and I couldn't kill her. I just, there was a scene in the basement, and anybody who reads the book knows exactly which scene I'm talking about, when I thought, oh no, she deserves to live. She's tried so hard in this story. So that was the end of The Surgeon, and I wanted to know what happened next to Jane, and so I wrote a second book.
And I am going to interrupt here because we do have to take our first break of the podcast. But I have to say that I'm always fascinated by characters that kind of take on a life of their own, right? You'd think that it's the author writing the characters, but so often I hear authors talk about how characters kind of do things without them. Like they'll be writing and suddenly this character will just go in a different direction. So I find that fascinating. We're going to hear more about that second book and how it led to the Rizzoli and Isles series. But we are, as I said, going to take our first break of the podcast, so stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We'll be right back.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
And we're back with the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Tess Gerritsen, author of I Know a Secret, the 12th book in the Rizzoli and Isles series. And Ms. Gerritsen has been speaking about how this series came into being with a book she was not even the main character, about Jane Rizzoli, and then a second book featuring Maura Isles and how those two kind of got together and figured out their partnership. So let's get back to that interview.
And the second book was called The Apprentice. And in that follow-up book, I introduced another female character named Dr. Maura Isles, who's the medical examiner. Wanted to know more about her, so I wrote a third book called The Sinner, and then I had a series. So that's how it all started. It was never intended. It was never planned out, and here I am 12 books later.
Wow, those are some stubborn characters that refuse to die.
I know they refuse to die, but sometimes those are the best characters of all, are the ones you don't really pay attention to, the ones who almost develop a personality by themselves without the author paying attention.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So this is the 12th book now in the series, and it's called I Know a Secret. So What can you tell us about this book?
Well, in this story, Jane and Maura encounter quite a shocking crime scene. It's a young woman who appears to be quite peacefully lying in her own bed, and she might even be asleep, except for the fact that she's holding her eyeballs in her hand.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of a weird crime scene, and they think they're just dealing with a weirdo. But when there's another body that shows up, this time it's a young man who's found with arrows in his chest, Maura realizes there's a connection between these two, because in both these cases, the mutilation is post-mortem, and she cannot figure out what killed these two young people. So that's what's really driving her nuts, is she wants to find the cause of death, and she can't figure it out. So that starts off the story.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely, it definitely catches your attention, because you just jump right into the scene and it's like, oh, well, okay, we got to figure out where this is going and how these things are connected. Are there autobiographical elements in any of the series or the characters?
Oh, yes, there definitely are. Well, first of all, Jane is totally unlike me. She's my opposite. She's aggressive, and she's not afraid to speak her mind. And she sort of reflects a lot of female cops I've met. But Maura Isles is my alter ego. She's a scientist. She believes in logic. She wants an explanation for everything. She wants to explain the unexplainable. And in a lot of ways, she mirrors my own personality. And so when I was creating Maura, I used a lot of shorthand. I put myself in her place. So Maura has a lot of the same details as I do from my life. We both went to the same college and medical school. We both drive the same car. We both like the same wines. So,
okay.
In a lot of ways, I just imagine myself in her place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fascinating. So now I'm just kind of I'll be picturing you a little bit, I think, when I read her character. So, is there anything that you can tell us that's upcoming for these two characters without spoiling anything?
No, I don't know. Right now, I'm taking a break from them. I'm writing another kind of book, a very different kind of book. It's a ghost thriller, or there may or may not be a ghost involved, and it's been a lot of fun because, when I was a child, my mother was really big into paranormal stuff. I mean, she believed in ghosts. She'd seen ghosts all through her childhood in China. And she believed in a lot of things that I thought were totally cuckoo. So, in a way, it's a revisit to my childhood and some of those strange theories that I grew up with. And I'm also, doing some work with my son on a film project. He and I both made a horror film together, and now we're working on a documentary about pigs. So we're just, my life is like all over the place now. I think as I get older, I realize I feel the approach of the end of time, and I feel that this is the time to really be doing all the projects that I want to do. I mean, there's no better time than right now.
Mm-hmm. And you said the documentary is about pigs. I just want to make sure I heard that right.
Yes, pigs, the animal pigs. We're hunting down an interesting historical mystery, and that is why pigs became forbidden food.
Oh, interesting.
For Jews and Muslims. And
yeah.
It's we have to go back 3,000 years to find the reasons behind it. I mean, there are all the reasons that we hear about, such as trichinosis. They're dirty, they're bottom feeders, that kind of thing. But is there something else going on? And so that's what we're looking at.
Fascinating. Thank you. And you mentioned your mom, which reminded me that in I Know a Secret, you mentioned that your mother loved horror movies. Even though English wasn't her first language, she still loved horror movies. So this book was also kind of an homage to that with your mom.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there's a lot to do with horror films in the book. In fact, one of the clues is actually in a horror film. So a lot of it had it was a bit of shared information about the experience of being an independent horror film producer, which I was with my son, and that whole subculture, people who love horror fans, horror filmmakers. I mean, they're really a fun crowd, and they're I feel a great affection for that crowd because I grew up in that same crowd. So, this book also has some information about horror films. It also has some information about art, which I was inspired by, traveling in Italy, looking at paintings, especially sacred religious paintings, where I realized there was a lot of symbolism there that the average person doesn't see in a painting. Symbols that tell you who these people are, whether they died a martyr, little things that you might not even notice if you were just taking a glance at a painting. But the painter and those who understand what the symbols mean can learn a lot just by looking at a particular painting. When I was touring museums in Italy, I thought, well, what if a killer did the same thing with his crime scenes? What if, in fact, when he leaves a crime scene, he's leaving little clues as a sort of a message to somebody, but we don't really know who that somebody is. And that was part of the inspiration for I Know a Secret.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. So you mentioned that you are working on another novel, a standalone novel. How many standalone novels do you have out currently?
I have to think about that.
Oh, no, I have to make you count. I'm sorry.
I guess it would be about 15. I think it'd be 15. Okay. Because I started off writing romantic suspense, and those were all standalones. And then I did a number of medical thrillers. I've done science fiction. I've done historical. So, yeah, there have been a lot of standalones in my career. Okay.
And this newest one, do you have an idea as to when it might be coming out?
No, I'm just about finished with it, at least the first draft. So I'm hoping probably, knowing the schedule of how books get released, maybe a year from now.
Okay. You said that you've been writing for 30 years, so but you were a doctor before that. Were you writing at the same time, or did you kind of transition your career?
Well, there was a little bit of blending because I wrote my first book when I was on maternity leave from the hospital. And after that period, I was doing part-time medicine while writing novels, while being a mother of 2 young kids. So it was there was that period of time when I think I wrote 2 novels while I was working part-time as a doctor.
And raising 2 kids, did you sleep?
Well, I was very lucky. Both my sons liked to sleep, so they took long naps. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
They're very cooperative babies.
So was writing something that you'd always wanted to do, or did you just kind of come to it in a different way?
I knew I was a writer when I was 7 years old, and I told my father that I was going to be a writer. And he said that was no way to make a living. So he steered me towards the sciences, and that's how I ended up going to medical school. Partly because I do like science, but also because I wanted to please my father. It was a traditional Chinese American family. But I always had that writing bug, and I always knew I would be telling stories, whether it was as a professional writer or as a hobbyist.
I am going to jump in here once again for our second break of the podcast. Have you noticed, though, in many of these interviews, how many of the authors say that they knew from, a young age, 6, 7, that they wanted to be a writer, that they wrote their first story at that age and really knew that this was what they wanted to pursue? I love that. I think that is just fascinating and wonderful. But we do have to take our second break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back with the GSMC Book Review Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we're back with the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Tess Gerritsen about her latest book in the Rizzoli and Isles series. It's called I Know a Secret, so let's get right back to that interview. Do you keep to a certain schedule, or do you have a favorite place to write? What does your writing process look like?
I write. My writing process it really depends on what else is going on in my life. I have a home office. I always work here. And when I'm working on our first draft, my goal is to do 4 pages a day, which tells me that I can probably finish a first draft within about 6 to 7 months, and then I spend the rest of the time rewriting. I think the only thing that's unusual about my process is that my first drafts are with pen and paper. I can type really fast. That's not the problem. It's just that I find that if I see my words on a computer screen, I feel compelled to edit. And I think editing during the first draft it stops the story cold. So I think it's really important just to tell the story and then edit when you get to the second, third draft.
Okay. That's your writing process. And then do you have any kind of advice for aspiring authors?
Yeah, my advice is to finish the first draft. Don't. I really think that editing while you're going along can stop you. I think it just is a roadblock there, because then you want to perfect. And if you try to perfect that first chapter, you will never get past the first chapter. And I think the other piece of advice is that I tell first-time writers, don't try for perfection the first time. You're really just getting that story down. Trying to be perfect is going to stop you. Again, another roadblock. So finish the first draft and don't stop until you've written the end, and then go back. And after you finish the first draft, it's a really depressing time, because you go back and look at it and you see flaws, but they can be fixed, and you have to have the confidence that you can fix whatever's wrong.
Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that once you're done with the first draft, then you start typing it into your computer, and then and you kind of edit as you go then?
Right. I'm really attached to paper, so everything I edit is immediately printed off.
Okay.
Because I just don't trust the ether. I always say I'm going to lose it, electronically.
Right. Yes.
But I guess I'm just old-fashioned that way.
Yeah, well, it's your process, so whatever works for you is great.
And that is exactly right. And I think that's a really important thing to tell beginning authors, is that there's no right way or wrong way, that whatever works for you is your way.
Mm-hmm. So you've just finished the first draft of this new novel. So I was going to ask what's next, but I would assume that editing is next. That's probably your next project.
Editing is next, and I've already got the idea for the next novel brewing in my head.
Okay.
And I've already collected some research material for the next book. So I always feel like I've got several kind of lined up, waiting to go.
And do you try to finish the editing of one before you research or write another?
Yes, I do, because I like to finish things, and I want this to be done and sent off before I really start work on the other one. But a lot of prep work for a book is really all meant. It's before you write a thing. Your characters are starting to form in your head. They're starting to talk to you. You're starting to see where they're going to go, and that's already happening with the next story.
Okay, fun. Thank you. Do you like to read?
I love to read, but it's even though I write thrillers, I tend to read mostly nonfiction.
Okay.
When I'm off on vacation or something, I'll bring along either something to do with history or archaeology, something like that. And especially now, when I'm working on this documentary with my son, I'm doing a lot of reading for that.
Okay. And do you have favorite authors?
Well, when it comes to thrillers, which I know, your listeners are probably the ones who like those, I always say, you can't go wrong with the three Lisas. There are these three novelists who all their names are Lisa: Lisa Gardner, Lisa Scottolini, and Lisa Unger. And you can't find a bad book by any of these three women.
Perfect. Thank you. So where can people find you on the internet? Do you have a website? Do you have social? Are you available on social media?
Yes, I have a website. It's simple. It's tessgerritsen.com.
Easy enough.
Now the hard part is the spelling of my name, and I blame my husband for that. Gerritsen is a really hard name to spell because it's Dutch, so it has no O's. It's E's.
Right.
And I'm also on Twitter and on Facebook, although I don't go on Facebook that much. Probably mostly Twitter because it's so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about in terms of your writing or books or anything that we haven't covered?
No, I think that's about it. I think the only thing that people always ask is where do ideas come from, and I just say, be curious, because I find that a lot of my ideas for my stories come from reading the news, watching the news, and paying attention to what's going on around you in the world. I think the more data you acquire, the more stuff comes to you in terms of ideas for novels.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate you taking the time out of your weekend to talk to me today. It was really fun. You sound like someone that it'd be fun to wander around in your brain for a while if that were possible and just see all the ideas that are brewing. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. And once again, as always, I want to thank my guest, author Tess Gerritsen, for taking the time out of her weekend to sit down with me and talk about her newest book in the Rizzoli and Isles series. It's called I Know a Secret. And as I said, it's really good. And if you are a fan of this type of murder, mystery, suspense, thriller kind of novel, then you should definitely check it out. It's got wonderful, strong female characters in it. They have a very complex and real kind of relationship and friendship together, and it's just very well written, and I really enjoyed it. So I highly recommend it to you and think that you should go out and, either buy one or check it out from your library or borrow it from a friend, whatever you can do. Just go out and check out this Rizzoli and Isles series, and I know I'm going to go back and read some of those first 11 as well. So thank you again to Tess Gerritsen for joining me today. Thank you also for joining me. And before I sign off, I do want to send out a bit of a shout out to a dear friend of mine who lives in Texas. Tori is a friend of mine. I've known her since she was, about 12, I think, which makes me feel a little old, but that's okay. Tori, this interview is dedicated to you. I know that you love Tess Gerritsen's works, that you have read every book she's ever written, and you were so excited that she was going to be on the podcast. So, Tori, I dedicate this episode to you, and I did tell Tess how much you love her books. So, I love you, and as I said, this podcast is dedicated to you. Thank you so much to all of my listeners for tuning in. Please join me again next week on Tuesday. I will be having a return author come back, Marianne Marlowe, who was here a couple months ago with her debut novel, Some Kind of Magic, has just released her second novel, A Crazy Kind of Love, and it involves the brother of the main character from Some Kind of Magic. So we get to return to that world a little bit and see what's going on with those characters, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you will join me as I speak once again with Marianne Marlowe, author of A Crazy Kind of Love. In the meantime, you can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmc.com. gsmcpodcast.com. You can download those podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, any app that you use for your mobile device. And please follow us and interact with us on social media. I would love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. So thank you again. Join me again next week. And in the meantime, go out and get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.